Hey guys, Tarke here, and today I am with a sponsored video for Guardians of Ember. Now, I'm not being paid to like the game, I'm just being sponsored to tell you about the game. I've already done 2 streams, this is now a video. I'm not entirely sure why I decided to do that, but I thought that'd be a fun little intro. So, getting into this game. There are some elements of this game that I really do enjoy, but there are some concerns that I feel like I have to share with you, otherwise it wouldn't be honest. I have also prepared a bunch of notes that I'll be getting into in just a second. So I'll show you some of the combat and some of the slight issues I have, and then I'll get into my massive wall of text here. But anyway, let me just show you the core game. So this is a MMORPG. And it's got like a mixture of ARPG and MMO elements. They directly refer to it as if like Diablo met WoW. Now, in terms of the character building as an ARPG, I think this game actually really does deliver. There's lots of pretty cool things that you can do. I've played about 10 or so hours of the game thus far, and I have enjoyed the core gameplay. When the game works, I genuinely do enjoy it, and the character building is really cool. This game has a pretty interesting dual class system, and there's something quite satisfying about getting massive groups of mobs, as I'll gather up here, and running around and then AoEing them all down with my heals and my high mobility. It's not always the case, but I do fairly regularly encounter almost kind of like desync, for anyone who remembers early Path of Exile days, where it feels like my character and the enemies that I'm attacking are like rubber banding backwards and forwards. Now, a patch has actually just gone out. I particularly noticed it with these Grim Reaper style enemies, where it felt like they'd be teleporting before the patch. Let's see if that's been fixed since the patch. They don't actually seem to be doing that anymore, so they might have even fixed it, which is a really good sign. Huh. So that kind of gets into my main first point. If they can remedy all of the server-side issues I was having since the game is in beta, then I do genuinely think this game has a solid chance on the market as a free-to-play ARPG, because the core foundations with the character building are there. So it's really just a case of, can they just stick to their guns, keep pushing out content, and fixing up all the little bugs. Now, one of the things I feel like I have to address before I get into my core notes of this video is this game's history, since there's quite a bit of confusion around Guardians of Ember, because people are like, hey, didn't that game come out a couple of years ago? So Guardians of Ember first released in 2016 under a different publisher. Now, that publisher was doing shady things with Steam reviews, where they were leaving their own Steam reviews for their game, basically, which is against the terms of service. Ooh, I just got a pretty cool weapon. Sick. Nice. So, because of that, Steam removed it from the game, and Steam was not happy. They removed the game from their library. You know, they weren't happy about that at all. Since then, Gameforge has bought up the IP, and they've been doing just a complete kind of overhaul on the game systems, and they're trying to basically re-release it with a soft remaster, fix up all the initial problems, and that's why they're approaching people like me to give our thoughts and opinions on the game. So that was just a early dungeon that I ran, and actually it seems like they did a good job fixing up the combat. I didn't really encounter the desync issues that I was having before, so that's actually a pretty promising sign. So let's get into my actual kind of like notes here. So how does the monetization work for this kind of game? This is a free-to-play game with microtransactions that include cosmetics and convenience items. So to show you the store, one thing which I do actually kind of like about how the store functions is, as you can see, they have free items that you get every day just for logging in. So while their store does contain a lot of convenience items, you can get those convenience items as a free-to-play player, but you have limited access to them compared to someone who is playing and buying everything off the store. Also, on that note, for the 10 hours or so that I played this game, I didn't use any of the codes that I was given as a streamer, giving me access to some of these convenience items, such as repair hammers, extra loot keys, mounts, etc. This game does have mounts and inventory space on their store, and I felt like I didn't need either of those, because as you can see, I have quite a lot of mobility built into my character. I have 3 movement skills and a movement speed buff, which I can give to parties. And since this game also has a fast travel system, where you can just be like, I want to jump over here now, I didn't ever feel like I was missing out by not having mounts, and even when I was running alongside mounted players in the open world, because this is a MMO after all, you see these are actual real people I can say hello to, you do see other people running by. As for the cosmetics in this game, I feel like my character actually looks pretty cool considering I'm a level 20 something. I find the art style and the weapons pretty interesting in my personal opinion. There's a little bit of clipping coming through on the armor sets, which is technically my fault. So this game has a very in-depth character creation, which I'll show you later, and I wanted to make the henchest dwarf possible, but because of that, I now have some clipping on my armor where I made the proportions slightly skew-if. Whereas if you compare it to this human character here, he has none of the issues because his character is built correctly proportionally, and if you compare to these NPCs, they all look pretty decent. The art style, here's someone on a mount, so comparing their run speed to me, I think they're like overcumbered or something. I'm pretty, you know. Now the case where the microtransactions will really take advantage is when it comes to the inventory space. So if I open up my inventory, you can see all the stuff I have here. Now this is the limited inventory space, and here you can see how you can expand the backpack there. Now, they actually have a pretty good system for this as a free-to-play player. So any items that you get, you can disassemble while you're out and about in the world, and you can choose like up to certain rarities, so on and so forth, and you can drag items in there, whatever, and then you can break them down. Now what this means is you can be still picking up loot constantly as you're playing, like farming dungeons out in the main world, but I can go to like a vendor and breaking everything down, and you can still be collecting all your crafting resources that you use in professions, so on and so forth. So while you definitely will have an advantage if you buy more bag space, it doesn't seem too limiting. So considering that for the free-to-play game, from what I've played, it seems fairly fair, and it's only a 7 gig download, I would honestly recommend that most players who are remotely interested in the game just download it and make your own opinion. So yeah, if what I'm saying here seems like, maybe you could look past some of the server-side issues, which may be getting fixed, it seems they are fixing some of them, just make your own kind of opinion on that one. So now that we've spoken about the dev side of things, the monetization, I've shown you a little bit of the combat. I'll just expand on how the skills themselves work, and then I'll get into the character creation and then just give some more like general thoughts. So this follows a fairly standard 7 limited action bar skill system. I have a generator on my left click. I have a spender on my right click. There's also another character over here showing off his abilities, which is kind of handy. I have a short cooldown heal, which gives me a shield. And then I have 1, 2, 3 movement skills, and this also gives an AoE heal and movement speed to allies. You can do most things in this game solo, or you can do group dungeons like mini raids and stuff, and you can make some pretty cool like synergies when you start playing with other players. I then have a DPS cooldown, which is a boomerang, which I think looks really cool, and it roots enemies and does a absolute boatload of damage. That dungeon that I showed you earlier, that was a level appropriate dungeon, and dungeons have like 3 difficulties. The base difficulty, appropriate on level, very easy. The tier 2 and tier 3 dungeons are actually like pretty difficult, and you really have to start thinking about those. So this is how the skill system works. Now this was the main thing I actually really enjoyed about this game. This game throws skills at you at a very early level. Now, I am a ranger as my main class, and as I mentioned earlier, there is a dual class system. Fairly early into the quest, you unlock the abilities to then have a second class, and you can take as many abilities from your main or secondary class as you would like. So, before I explain the secondary class stuff, let me show you the core abilities. So at level 1, fresh, brand new character, you have 3 abilities unlocked, and they will be 3 generator style abilities, as you can see here. And as you level up, you gain points that you can spend to augment your abilities. So you'll have a choice of 1 of 2 passive, for example, attack speed and critical hit chance. And then as you go along, you'll then unlock new abilities which behave, in some cases very differently, in some cases slightly differently, as you go through the tier. So a good example of this would be one of the movement skills that I fully upgraded. So the base movement skill version, like level 1 when you first unlock it, is just a dash, which sends your character back, forwards and backwards again, which does damage. So you're mostly using it to reposition in packs and maybe do a little bit of burst damage to enemies. However, when you spec into it, you can then have it so that when you do that dash, it actually debuffs the enemies you hit. And you can see there that it kind of like does this explosion. That will debuff all the enemies hit by it. But if you upgrade it further, you can turn it into just a traditional movement skill where you still deal damage through enemies, but you just shoot further and forwards. And that's one thing I actually really liked about this game, is like being, oh, I like this core skill, but I want to then tweak it to suit my needs or the dungeon or the group I'm currently in. And I did that quite a lot when it came to the movements side of things. So here, for example, another movement skill which does damage just at a base level. It's just like, okay, you do a roll and deal damage, but then the next version of it, it then changes the damage to do more damage, and then when you're somersaulting, you shoot nearby enemies, which is pretty cool. You can then have it so that you then leave like a gas trail behind your character, which then poisons enemies. And the final version I went for does a massive burst of damage, debuffs their movement speed, and gives me a movement speed buff, which is pretty powerful. And you're like, okay, but these all seem like mechanically fairly similar. When you get into the actual like DPS style abilities, that's where they really sort of change up. So one of the base like spenders from the engineer class is a diffusion grenade. So it does 120% nature damage to all enemies. You throw the grenade and it's just an instant explosion. Seems pretty simple, right? If you then upgrade it, however, it completely changes how it functions. So instead of being an instant grenade that explodes and deals damage, it's then a grenade that you throw, it bounces, and it heals allies in the blast radius of each bounce. That's really cool. You can then upgrade it again, so instead of doing nature damage, it does fire damage, and it explodes after a delay. So then it changes the playstyle completely, and so on and so forth. And that was one thing that I really appreciated about this game. Also, there's a pretty in-depth like stat system. So every time you level up, not only do you unlock abilities that you can then augment and upgrade, but you also gain stats that you can spend to like attribute points basically to upgrade your character. Each attribute relates to different things. So focus gives you attack speed and block chance. Blood increases your physical, dark, frost, nature, maximum health, and instant healing. I build all around nature damage and healing, so I put most of my focus into blood. And then bravery affects different damage types, and then prestige is crit and resistances. So if you're someone who's into the whole character building side of things, and you can look past some ropey combat at times, when the combat works, I do genuinely enjoy the combat. When it doesn't work, that's when I get frustrated. I've had this conversation with Rise, who's also doing a sponsor of this game. He's in the same scenario. He's like, the game's fun when it works, but when it doesn't work, it's really fucking annoying. One other thing that sometimes happens to me, and I don't know if this is because I'm playing a short character as a dwarf, sometimes I've gotten stuck on terrain. If I'm like jumping around on stairs or like using movement skills, I can get stuck. It didn't always happen, and every time I did get stuck, I could just use a movement skill to instantly get out of it. But yeah, there definitely are some bugs there that you need to think about. So I'll show you the character creation and show you like all the different classes, because that's another thing which is actually quite a cool thing about this game. So when you create a character, you have like a base, 4 races to pick from, male, female, and then full character sliders. Now for MMOs, this is fairly standard. But when it comes to ARPGs, this is pretty cool, because ARPGs are generally just kind of like, you play the mage or you play the knight, that's it. So in terms of classes and races, you have the bog standard human, elf, dwarf, and orc variant. For this example, I will make a elf, and then standard pick male or female. And then for classes, and again, remember there's the dual class system. You have the knight, the priest, the arcanist, so like the mage, the engineer, who has a bunch of explosives and machinery and turrets. You have the ranger. These are the 2 classes I was playing, which is more like poison and nature focused. Bows, still has some traps. There's some like overlap in ranger and engineer thematically. And then you have the Dark Knight, which is kind of like a Death Knight, and it's more like necrotic based and using void and poison energies. And again, you can completely mix and match. So you could have a like death focused, but then also using priest, using some dark abilities from the priest. So you could have like a shadow priest, death knight hybrid, or you could have like a healer tank hybrid, or so on and so forth. And then you have the fairly standard like skin colors and all of that stuff, hair colors. You're like, okay, that's all fairly basic, eye color, whatever. But the thing where it gets pretty cool is you then have more traditional MMO kind of things where you can then fully adjust everything from head size to shoulder width or chest depth and chest width, as many characters really care about in this game. And you can actually really get in there and making a pretty unique feeling character. This will not appeal to some people who just go for the defaults, but people who do like this stuff, you can spend hours upon hours in this. Also, one thing, I know quite a few people who actually do this. I have some friends who play D&D, and they purposely look for free-to-play MMOs like this, and they use the character creators to make their own characters, and then like they take pictures of it and stuff. So yeah, if you're into that crazy next-level character creation style thing, I can definitely recommend Guardians of Ember on that aspect of things. And if you're into the more traditional appeal of ARPGs, with the super in-depth character creation and build making. That was the main thing that I've really enjoyed about the game. Getting into some other things just kind of worth mentioning, and there will be some choppiness as I click out of the game. The FPS will go down as I go through my Google Doc. Getting into the campaigns and the quests. So this is a fairly important thing, and I'll go back in game to show you this. So you're like, okay, so it's an MMO ARPG hybrid. How does the questing and the campaign system work? Now, when you first make a brand new character, you start off in this place called Rye Ridge, and it's fairly bog standard goblin enemies. There's a goblin invasion, and you need to fight back against the hordes of goblins who are attacking these guys. You have some pretty cool boss fights early on with trolls, which are genuinely kind of impactful, but it's all like fairly standard low-level enemies. I found that the core gameplay was fun enough that I didn't mind the somewhat traditional like start, but actually as I got deeper into the game, the quests actually really did expand and get quite interesting. If you can be bothered to read the quest text. I believe it's J, yes. So nearly everything is just a case of reading. One thing they do kind of have, which I quite like, is any like important names will be in green, and bindings will be in R and T. So if you're someone who doesn't like reading quest text, you can instantly just kind of like glance at your thing, and it's like, oh, I need to talk to this guy. Oh, I need to press this button to do this. Okay, cool. But if you do actually read all of it, there was a pretty cool quest line all to do with political intrigue and the church doing shady stuff. And that actually got really, really interesting. This game also has fishing, and you can see you have a fishing NPC fairly early on. You'll probably see some of these characters talking to them, they'll start fishing. And the world felt pretty alive and active. I am on the European servers, and I did encounter quite a few English-speaking players, but there are a lot of Russians. You'll see a lot of Russians in general chat. Also, since we are looking at these fish, I think it's worth noting that the visuals in this game really are cool. If you're into this, I think it's kind of similar to like early fantasy Warhammer. If you're into this aesthetic, like the water detail is really good. I don't know. I also really like the OST. So in terms of soundtrack and visuals, I would give this game a thumbs up. And the campaign and quests, while the quests themselves are fairly straightforward, the storylines are actually pretty interesting for what I've experienced so far, so I would say they're mostly positive when it comes to reviewing that side of things. Now, what are you actually going to be doing when you get to endgame? Keep in mind, I've only played up until level 20, only into the early game, so I can only speak from my own personal experiences, but from some of my viewers who have stuck with this game and have been playing it for a while now, endgame consists of PvE, dungeons, and mini-raids, player versus player combat, and then doing stuff with professions and playing the economy. On the note of the economy, this game does not use an auction house. Not having an auction house is quite rare when it comes to MMOs. As someone who doesn't really like what auction houses do to MMOs, I like the fact this game doesn't have an auction house. Because there isn't an auction house, it forces you to actually go up and meet other players and interact with other players. If you want their stuff, you have to actually go up to them and you form bonds, and it makes servers feel alive. Looking at stuff like classic WoW, having that tight-knit community, I really like. You do miss out on a lot of convenience, though. Some people will hate that. So if you're the kind of guy who likes, like, pre-Grand Exchange RuneScape, and you like standing around in towns and talking in general and doing all that stuff, good for you. If you don't like that, you probably won't enjoy this game too much on that side of things. So, for my overall kind of like closing thoughts, and just to quickly recap my concerns, the main case where I could see this game going slightly askew is in terms of the microtransactions. So far, they seem fairly fair, and as I said myself, I never felt like I was missing out, and since you do get free stuff from logging in daily, if you are committed to this game, and you are somewhat intelligent about what you're doing, I think you can play this mostly free to play, but as always, some people just refuse to play games with a microtransaction store like this. And then in terms of the server stability. So, when I tried recording this video yesterday, I was having loads of issues with server stability. Today, for this demonstration, I didn't actually encounter any of the lag and any of the real concerns. So that could mean that either they're doing an amazing job fixing all the bugs, or I just got lucky today with player times and peak servers. I would really just say, if you are at all interested in this game, use the referral link in the description. It's free, try it out yourself, and yeah. Overall, Guardians of the Ember, I would say, is worth checking out if you're looking for something to keep you busy for a couple of days. I'm Tarke, have a good day, bye-bye.